Greetings all, D&Disability here. I have a doozy of a video for you. We'll be diving into Froma Zeitlin's The Closet of Masks, role-playing and myth-making in the Orestes by Euripides, and try to take their very specific argument specific to a famous Greek play and tease out their theory in giving new way to view RPGs and TTRPGs. As much as I hate to do it, Encyclopedia Britannica puts a summary of the play better than I ever could. Orestes, play by Euripides, performed in 408 BCE, it retells the story of the aftermath of Orestes' matricide. Euripides set the play in a world where courts of law already exist. In his version, Orestes, his sister Electra, and his cousin and friend Pallades are condemned to death by the men of Argos for the murder. Their uncle, Menelaus, is too spineless to defend them, and they plot to kill Menelaus's wife Helen and to abduct her innocent daughter. This chaos of violence and attempted murder is resolved only by the deus ex machina of Apollo, who finally appears and restores harmony. While nowhere near a replacement for the original, it gives us an idea of what we are working with. A Greek play with actors playing fluid roles and a god character coming out of nowhere to rectify this terrible situation. We often think of myth as being immutable. The aesthetic and redemptive aspects of myth leaves us looking backwards with feelings of nostalgia and firmly rooted in a past we've never experienced, or at least only experienced vicariously. We as gamers are left to retell myths, crawl inside them, and explore them. Zeitlin presents this play as being an answer for the 5th century Greeks looking for a solution to this tension. The Orestes is a play that most accurately embodies the dilemma by placing myth and reality in their most paradoxical and problematic confrontation, whereby each can only mirror the other in an odd series of reflections that can never close up the distance, can never reconcile the fundamental otherness that separates them. This mirroring leads to a constructive feedback loop that often pushes artists of all types to extremes. The myth and performance mimic truths in the Greek world just as other forms of media do today, with the exception that this myth was as self-aware as Deadpool breaking the fourth wall. However, as a play, it circumvents myth, just as TTRPGs and RPGs do, and becomes a work of fiction. As Zeitlin writes, for myth is a relatively closed and predetermined form, while fiction is marked by a receptivity to experimentation and change. But again, myth-making, as discussed by Zeitlin, places the role of myth-making as between formal and formless category, which defies a Levi Straussian bundle of constructs approach to examination. We must break out of the binary, in other words. Zeitlin writes, myth cannot be viewed in Levi Straussian terms as simply a bundle of constructs and relations, but rather as the province of an individual poet who actively involved in the business of literature with all that it implies. The genre of myth generated, in Zeitlin's case this poem, dictates the nature of the myth's metamorphosis. The teller of the story inherently interacts with, changes aspects of the myth, which is called the act of mythopoiesis, in Zeitlin's words. Zeitlin's contribution to this point goes further because, as Turner points out in his essay, The Self-Reflexive Tabletop Role-Playing Game, the act of play is a mimesis within a mimesis, a reflexive act that sees the enactment of play in Zeitlin's case, and in the case of RPGs and in Turner's case, is open to self-reflection and self-awareness. by its very nature. The act of double mimesis is not visible within the text of an RPG, rather, it shows itself in the act of playing the game. And for those who have a greater interest in this topic, I would point you to page 69 of Zeitlin's article and page 95 of Turner's. Changing roles in D&D, as the DM typically does, but sometimes players also do, is discussed within Orestes as well, and of course by Zeitlin. To quote Zeitlin directly, in fact, it is an operative principle in this drama that roles can and do shift from one actor to another, implying not only confusion of moral categories, but also fundamental confusions of identity. This role shift in in-game sense can be exemplified by the DM and players sharing an NPC. Whether it is a mount, follower, or men-at-arms, the DM and player often take turns controlling the NPC's actions and directing what they do. The player may also adopt multiple characters and also still exemplify Zeitlin's idea here, though this is less common. Another example that we can point to is the act of playing different, or in some cases, multiple genders. In Orestes, males take on female roles and become part of a self-reflexive work of art where the director, as mentioned before, breaks the fourth wall. They inform us that we witnessed stroke are witnessing a play, and what has happened offstage didn't actually happen, and call attention to this act of scene breaking. And if we agree that TTRPGs, both playing them and within the books themselves, count as art and therefore have aesthetic value, such as David McKay argues. By the by, I will be coming back to David McKay in a future video. He's extremely important for those of you interested in game theory. Then, Zeitlin's theory can also be applied to RPGs as well. Specifically, and I quote, from the point of view of aesthetics, if tragedy is a mimesis of an action, this play is really the mimesis of a mimesis, and what we find in the Orestes for the first time on an extended scale is truly self-reflective work of art that is, like Hamlet's play within a play, art in the process of reflecting an art. Modern D&D is a reflection of RPGs past and present. It pushes the same boundaries as literature and theater while still remaining a game. For some, the gamified aspects sit front and center. For others, theatrical elements come to the fore. Just look at any RPG VOD on YouTube or look at Critical Role. So we then sit as creators in the same position as Euripides did some 2,600 years ago. We sit in a market flooded with the same content, with games pushing boundaries of what it means to be a TTRPG, while still repeating some of the familiar and, in some cases, becoming hackneyed elements. Other narrators come on stage and interrupt the narrative with ex machina discussions of rules and mechanics. In short, there's nothing new under the sun, and we've been exploring these same connections for over 2 millennia. Alright, I hope this video helped you look at RPGs and TTRPGs a little differently. Zeitlin's ideas really help shed light on the connections between aesthetics, genre, creativity, expression, and supplies some formal concepts for understanding how and why RPGs do what they do. They straddle literature, performance art, myth, and more. Zeitlin shows, at least in part, how change happens because of innovation and through literary, performance-oriented modes of enactment. In other words, plays. And I hope that y'all enjoyed making some of these connections as much as I did. See you next week.